So we're just waiting for people to come in, and we'll get started in a moment. If you're just joining us now, people are just kind of coming in from the lobby into the amphitheater, the digital amphitheater, and we'll get moving. We'll get moving then.
Okay, I think we're good to go, Paul.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Yvonne. So welcome, everyone. It's great to see folks coming out on a beautiful Wednesday evening. And we are here, of course, to debate about the environment for the 2021 federal election. My name is Paul Manning, and I am tonight's moderator, and I'll be kind of moving things along as we go through. This event is really a fantastic event, and that's because it's one of these wonderful things that digital technology has allowed, these mass coordination of similar events across the country. So this has been organized and coordinated nationally by GreenPAC, and it's being organized locally here in Cumberland-Colchester by the Living Earth Council. So it's happening in 100 different ridings within the next few days, and we'll be able to come together and see how different ridings are coming together to answer the same questions and also local questions. So tonight, of course, we are here in Cumberland-Colchester on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The agenda for tonight is going to run about 2 hours, and we're going to start allowing everyone to have a chance to give opening remarks for each of our candidates, and then we're going to have 8 questions. The first 5, as I mentioned, are being asked at all 100 debates across the country, and the last 3 questions are local questions that were received from the community. Once every candidate has had a chance to respond to a question, there is an opportunity for rebuttals, and I'll remind participants, if you want to give a rebuttal, you can just use the raise hand icon, or you can give me a little wave with your camera, and we'll give you a chance to respond to those questions. You get 1, I'll be keeping track, and there will be also an opportunity at the end of the night to give some closing remarks. So time will be tight, unfortunately, tonight, so we won't have a chance to get questions from the viewers. But again, we had that opportunity when people submitted questions. So I wish we could have more participation, but given that we have a limited window of time, I think this is a good format going forward. So in organizing, all 6 candidates that are running for the federal riding of Cumberland-Colchester were invited to participate. And unfortunately, only 5 of them were able to join us tonight. But what we did is start out by randomly pulling names, and we're going to give each candidate the opportunity to speak first on at least 1 question through the night. So the order is going to change from question to question. And the order is going to be for the very beginning, Mr. Daniel Osborne from the NDP, Dr. Stephen Ellis from the Conservatives, Dr. Gillian Foster from the Green Party, Mr. Bill Archer from the People's Party, and Ms. Lenore Zan from the Liberal Party. And just as a friendly reminder, I know we have something phenomenal candidates here, but we're just asking as a reminder to ensure that we maintain decorum throughout. So candidates, we're going to be kind of sticklers with time, and we have a timekeeper who is going to be diligently keeping track. And they will make a sound when you have 30 seconds left in your answer, and they will make that sound again when your time is up. So I'm wondering if I can hear that sound. Did you hear the little bell? It might need to be a bit louder. Can you try that again, Soundkeeper? I can't hear that bell.
Oh no?
I can't hear it. Can you try it again, Yvonne? Maybe hit it a little louder. Okay, it's pretty faint.
Pretty faint? Okay, I'll work on something else while.
Okay, that sounds good.
And Paul, could you ask the participants to make sure that they're muted, all the attendees as well?
Okay, yes, so everyone should be muted throughout. And we'll have Yeah, we see a few people aren't muted yet, maybe. So just if you are attending, you should be muted. And we can also mute you. So we'll keep an eye on that too as co-hosts. Okay, so Yvonne is going to work on a sound, but we'll ask you to start by doing a 1 minute introduction and let us know who you are, even an opening statement. So we're going to start with Mr. Osborne.
Thank you. So my name is Dan Osborne. I'm the New Democratic candidate running in this election. I'd like to start by thanking you, Paul, and the Living Earth Council for organizing this debate, putting this together. Anybody who knows me personally or politically knows that environmental issues are, in my opinion, some of the most important of our time. So I look forward to discussing these issues with the other candidates who are running in this race. And I also look forward to sharing some of my party's plan for the environment with all of my friends and neighbors here in Cumberland-Colchester. Since I'm the first to open, I would also like to acknowledge that although we're not all together physically, we are together in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Again, just to conclude my opening statement, I want to say to all of my candidates, I do wish you good luck. I understand this is a debate, obviously, but all of us will benefit from our country having a strong climate plan. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Osborne. Next, we're going to go with Dr. Ellis.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the senseless murder of Mr. Prabhat Khatri, and I want everybody to be mindful of that and to be thoughtful of our community and his family. I'm a recently retired family physician and currently the COVID lead physician for admitted patients in Northern Nova Scotia. I've been involved with many volunteer organizations, including things like Walk with the Doc, Minor Hockey, Bible Hill Fire Brigade, and perhaps for this project, most importantly, the Guatemala Project, where our focus is on providing cleaner indoor air, primarily affecting women and children, and also reducing deforestation. And I'm certain all of you realize the benefit exposing young adults firsthand to those in need. And all of my family has been involved with the Guatemala Project for the last 12 years. And it's with these values of volunteerism, cultural awareness, and hard work that my wife Deborah and I have raised our 3 children. And it's because of these values that I want to be the next member of parliament here for Cumberland-Colchester. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Ellis. Next, we're going to Dr. Foster. Foster, I can't hear you. There you are.
Okay, I have to unmute myself. It's okay. I'd first like to say that I am honored to be invited. I am cognizant of the times we are in and the province that we're in and the heritage of our province. I chose to run for the Green Party and I was accepted, nominations were accepted. But the main reason that I have done that comes back to the veterinary oath that I took way back 33 years ago. And in being admitted to the veterinary profession, I was required to swear that I would use my scientific knowledge and skills for the benefit of society through the protection of animal health, the relief of animal suffering, the conservation of livestock resources, the promotion of public health, and the advancement of medical knowledge. It is with those values, especially looking after the environmental, human, and animal health as it relates to One Health and climate mitigation, that I've chose to run.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Foster. Next up, we have Mr. Archer.
Bonjour et bonsoir. Je m'appelle Bill et je suis le candidat pour le Parti populaire. I'd like to thank the Living Earth Council and the other candidates. I'm Bill Archer, and I am running on behalf of the People's Party of Canada to represent you as your member in Parliament. We are a center-right party and a safe party to vote for if your concerns are the environment. I am focused on short and long-term solutions for our environmental crisis. Unlike the conservatives who can't agree if climate change is real, or liberals who seem to be focused on wasting money on everything but the environment and think that a tax will fix the problem, I want to ensure that Ontario and Quebec do not dictate our local environmental policy. No more redundant studies. We are not like the liberals and conservatives who say one thing and do another. We need to focus on fixing the problems. We can all agree that the environment is important and needs to be protected. If you want to vote for the same wasteful spending, lip service, or inaction, then you can vote for the other parties. Their policies are the same: Liberals, Conservatives, Greens, or NDP. I am the only one that is focused on real action on protecting our shorelines, the isthmus, and ensuring that the homes of today withstand the storms of tomorrow. I want to earn your vote, and the PPC and I will be an advocate for you and not Ontario and Quebec. Thank you for, I hope to earn your vote tonight.
Thanks so much, Mr. Archer. And lastly, we're going to have Ms. Sand with her openings.
Thank you very much. And it's an honor to be here talking about the issue of the climate change, global warming, and the need to protect our environment, both here at home in Cumberland-Colchester and right across Canada. COVID-19 has really brought to light the links between the climate crisis, between human impact on nature, poverty, and also the rise of global pandemics like SARS, Ebola, and nearly 3/4 of infectious diseases. And the biggest threat to the health and well-being of the people of Cumberland-Colchester is unbridled climate change. Ask farmers who lost their crops last summer. I went to visit blueberry farmers, livestock farmers who'd only had a crop of maybe 32 haystacks instead of 136 of the year before, and tiny little berries or no crop at all. Climate change is real and we need to take it seriously, and the Liberal government is doing so. I'm proud of the work that we have done so far, but I know we need to do more, and I look forward to this debate. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Ms. Sand. So thank you to all the candidates for your opening statement. And now we're going to get into the first question. The first question, we're going to call this the lightning round, because they're going to be short answers, 20 seconds. And it's, I'm just going to kind of preface it by saying COVID-19 has brought to light the links between the climate crisis, the human impact on nature, and the rise of global pandemics. Like SARS, Ebola, and nearly 3/4 of infectious diseases, scientists generally agree that COVID originated in other animal species and spread to humans in large part because of the pressures of these species brought on by land use change and unsustainable consumption. And these factors are also the leading causes of climate change. So what I'm going to be doing is asking 3 yes or no questions that each deal with immediate measures that our government can take to address these interlinked crises to protect the health of Canadians as we emerge from the worst of this pandemic. So candidates, because this is a lightning round, what I'll do is I'll ask you the first question and get your responses before get this response from each candidate before moving on to the next question. So the first question is, will you develop a new incredible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, fresh water, and ocean by 2030? It's a yes or no question, but you can use up to 20 seconds if you wish. So we're going to start with Mr. Osborne.
Unequivocally, yes. There's no question about that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Next, so we'll go with Dr. Ellis.
Thanks very much. I do have to say, as a scientist, as a physician, the original assumption that COVID and other disease origins is really unproven. I don't think there's general acceptance of that. However, to answer your question, we're going to invest an additional $3 billion between now and 2030 in natural climate solution, focusing on management of forest, crop, grazing lands, restoration of grasslands, wetlands, and forests. These solutions will have multiple benefits, helping sequester carbon and also protection for communities and additional benefits for wildlife.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Ellis. Next, we have Dr. Foster.
My answer is definitely yes. The question is essentially a green goal. And when it relates to pressures on environment and human pressures back, there is always that want to survive of life. And no matter what we do, we need to be cognizant of that. I do want to state, though, there are acts in place in lots of provinces that could be used for the purposes that are stated, but they're not being. And the civil service needs to be take note and be accountable and not stand in the way of using the acts that exist and any new acts that there could be for the good of the climate, the country, and the citizens.
Thanks so much, Dr. Foster. Next, we have Mr. Archer.
Protecting our environment has reached a tipping point. It behooves me why the Liberals, Conservatives, NDP, and Greens have all allowed Quebec to continue to dump raw sewage into the fresh water section of the St. Lawrence River. We can do better.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Archer. And last, we'll have Ms. Ann.
Thank you very much. And yes, unequivocally, I agree that we are committed to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030. We've already protected a vast new area of lands and waters. And when we came into government, Canada had only protected less than 1% of our oceans, and we're now at 14%. We've also made the 2 largest investments in nature conservation in Canadian history, and we have an ambitious plan to do more. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Ms. Ann. So the second question in the lightning round, again, yes or no question, but you can use up to 20 seconds. And we're going to go in the same order just to keep it consistent. So this question is, will you commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030 and make it law? Yes or no? And we're going to start with Mr. Osborne.
Yes, and look, Paul, I can tell you that an NDP government would not dance around the idea of reducing our country's emissions. We wouldn't say like, oh, maybe we'll have a carbon tax for some parts of the country unless provinces want to do cap and trade. It would be the federal government's responsibility under the New Democratic Party to make sure that Canada is reducing our carbon emissions across the country. 60% by 2030 is an amazing goal, and we would get that done.
Great, thanks so much. Next, we have Dr. Ellis, same question.
So in our platform, we're going to introduce North American standards for key industrial sectors, backed up by border carbon adjustments to prevent leakage of emissions and job losses to countries with lower environmental standards and higher emissions, such as China.
Great, thank you, Dr. Ellis. Next, we have Dr. Foster, same question.
Hi, I have a little bit of a problem with the way the question is worded. And that is, it commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030. That it is a goal of the Green Party to have overall reduction of carbon emissions by 60%. Some sectors do not emit much carbon and are already doing a good job. To ask them to reduce 60% would be impossible. Some sectors that the question has nothing in consideration of carbon sinking and whether carbon through is being recycled or actually new putting out into the environment. And I just like to bring attention to that. But essentially, it is a goal of the Green Party, and I believe it is achievable by 2030 if everybody works together and there are ambitious restrictions.
Great, thank you, Dr. Foster. Next, we have Mr. Archer.
Carbon emissions are a global issue. The Liberals, Conservatives, NDP, and Greens will all have you believe that if we in Canada cut our emissions by 60%, we save the world. This is not the case. We need fulsome by sector reviews to find the low-hanging fruit and address that first, and then work with our international partners to further global emissions.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Archer. And last, we'll go with Ms. Sand.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And in fact, our government has committed to reducing emissions by 40 to 45% of 2005 levels by 2030, which is in line with what science says we need to go. And we will reach net zero by 2050. We do have a plan to reach this target. And in this election, we've committed to cap oil and gas emissions at current levels to ensure that they decline from now on, require half of new car sales to be zero emission by 2030 and all by 2035, and phase out fossil fuel subsidies. Personally, I would like to see us go even further, but I'd say that this is a very good start. And we've been given an A with regards to our plan by independent analysts. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Sand. Okay, we're on to the third short question. And this last question, again, answering in the same order, is, will you push your party's leadership to end all government subsidies for fossil fuels? Yes or no? And again, we'll start with Mr. Osborne.
Yes, Paul, absolutely. Look, this is already the line of thought in the NDP's leadership right now. I personally believe that a government that talks a big game about reducing our carbon emissions, about fighting for the environment, but then won't cut off all subsidies for these big fossil fuel companies, I don't think that's a government that really cares as much as my party does about fixing the carbon emission issue that we have in this country. So absolutely, I would.
Thanks so much. Next, we have Dr. Ellis, same question.
Thanks very much. One of the things that we need to consider when we're looking at all of these questions is the entire sector. For instance, if we decided to do that, how would that leave us with renewable fuel production, for instance, for fighter jets, for the Royal Canadian Air Force, which are essential to our protection? So I think people need to be a lot more considerate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Dr. Foster, same question.
So it all depends on what subsidies are. Reduction of subsidies for the sectors of the economy that are net producers of carbon from yesterday's sun, from fossil fuels, that is a must. But so is the reduction of tax credits or the removal of tax credits for oil and gas exploration. So is the requirement for research in other sectors and other industries to have matching industry contributions, and it's to the Green Party would look after that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. And last, we'll have Ms. Sam with this. Oh, sorry, apologies, Mr. Archer.
Yeah, it's all right. Fossil fuels subsidize green energy projects. That's the headline you don't see. The other party's virtue signaling ignores this reality. Many green projects are in fact subsidized by the fossil fuels revenue. A great example, Muskrat Falls. A majority of the $5 billion commitment comes from the federal government's portion of the oil and gas project's revenue in Newfoundland and Labrador. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. And last, we'll have Ms. Sand, same question.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad one of the previous candidates mentioned Muskrat Falls. I was actually in the government at the time when we signed that deal, which will provide 35 years of constant power, green power to Nova Scotians with a more steady cost. And I will be fighting for that. And yes, our government, our Liberal government, has committed to eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. Our platform commits us to do so by 2023, 2 years faster than previous commitments. And we will also develop a plan to phase out public financing of the fossil fuel sector, including crown corporations such as Export Development Canada. And I wholeheartedly support this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sandin. Okay, so that was the first question, kind of 3 questions wrapped into one, but now we're going to move on to question 2. So the question is, will you commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? What would you do to address how women and other marginalized groups have been disproportionately affected by both the pandemic and by environmental crises? And you have 1.5 minutes to answer this question, and we're going to start with Dr. Ellis.
Thanks, Paul. Our government is going to work with provinces to implement an innovative national personal low carbon savings account. And this will put a price on carbon for consumers without 1 penny going to the government. It will engage consumers in the process of building a low carbon future. You will pay into your personal low carbon savings account each time you buy hydrocarbon based fuel, and you'll be able to apply that money in your account towards things to live a greener life, such as buying a transit pass, if we were fortunate enough to have that here, but we have to think of all of Canada, or even a bicycle, or saving up your money to buy a new, more efficient furnace or energy efficient windows, or even an electric vehicle. Rather than continue to take money through a carbon tax from people who've been disproportionately affected by the pandemic and climate change, our plan will ensure that you can help fight climate change in the way that works best for you and your family, and at a carbon price that's affordable, starting at $20 per ton and increasing to $50 per ton, but no further. Even at this lower carbon price, we will ensure that this does not place an excessive burden on low-income Canadians, and will protect farmers by ensuring that they have affordable options.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ellis. Next, we have Dr. Foster. Same question. Dr. Foster, you're muted.
Regarding the extra strain or the extra harm that there appears to be to women and marginalized Canadians, I completely agree. And when we look at the root causes of that, financial issues are a concern. The reliance on family, on women, the number of women that don't have family. The lockdowns were a huge problem in meaning that any source for an argument could become worse, and then we end up with domestic violence. And in addition to that, women tend to be the people who are in the positions where they were actually exposed to more excrement than the other sectors of society, and more higher levels of exposure. The Green Party's focus on the basis of the economy, on getting jobs in the at the basis where life starts, and regenerative agriculture, regenerative methods, and also a basic living wage would help alleviate that. And I don't need to use this right now, but one of the things that did come out of the pandemic, as it was affecting women, was brought out by the women's group. And I just want to use this symbol, which is, I wanted to use that symbol, which is the universal symbol for women needing help. And the pandemic brought out the concerns, but the pandemic wasn't the concerns, it's just how things happened. So the Green Party would focus on all of those.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. Next, we're going to have Mr. Archer, same question.
Who wouldn't support a pandemic recovery that benefits all Canadians? We cannot have a recovery plan if it does not support a green economy while protecting our environment. However, Don't let the Liberals supported by the Green and NDP or the Conservatives tell you that they can address a green recovery when it is their economic environmental policies that created unemployment that went up from 5.7% in 2015 to 9.5% in 2019. Their poor policies and lip service doubled our unemployment rate and did nothing in the form of tangible results prior to the pandemic. It's important to remember that climate change affects us all. We are at the critical tipping point due to policies of successive Liberal and Conservative governments. And let us not forget that the NDP and Green also support these policies. Of course, it's important to support a green economic recovery from the pandemic, but we cannot lose sight that we need long-term solutions, not virtue signaling and lip service by the other parties today. It would be incumbent upon us as a country to work with other countries to achieve the same goals that we set for ourselves. A global recovery will take a global effort.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Next, we have Ms. Sand, same question.
Thank you very much. And again, so the question was, will we commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? And the answer to that as well about how to address women and other marginalized groups that have been disproportionately affected is yes. The government, the Liberal government has already committed to and funded a green and just pandemic recovery, and we will continue to do so. Let's think about the wage subsidy during COVID that protected workers who'd lost their jobs, cleaning up abandoned oil wells to create jobs for unemployed workers, funding the development of clean technology to help reduce emissions. And I have to say at this point that Erin O'Toole, as the leader for the Conservative Party of Canada, has stated that the Conservatives want to move backwards on Canada's climate targets and going to the extent of saying that Canada should weaken its climate goals. And that's completely out of step with what Canadians want. Also, I'd like to suggest that my bill C-230, an act to address environmental racism, does exactly what your question is proposing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sand. And it looks like we have our first rebuttal or response of the evening, and that's from Dr. Ellis. So I'll give you the floor, Dr. Ellis.
Thanks, Paul. You know, I think it's important, Ms. Zan talked about Liberal targets for reducing CO2 emissions of 40 to 45%. Our targets are 50 to 52%, significantly higher. I think the other thing that's really important is we also know that Ms. Zan's bill died on the floor when we have this unnecessary election called by her leader.
Thanks, Dr. Ellis. If anyone else respond, they can raise their hand or we can continue on. And just as a reminder, every candidate tonight gets one chance to respond. Seeing no hands, I'm going to call on Mr. Osborne for his response.
Thank you, Paul. Look, we are not able to talk about recovering from this pandemic. We're not able to talk about a green and just recovery from this pandemic without addressing who this pandemic affected the most, without talking about who was on the front lines during the lockdowns. And that is women and people who are marginalized, people who are often racial minorities. Look, these groups of people, women especially, are often most likely to be nurses. They're often most likely to be continuing care assistants. They're often most likely to be grocery store and cafe workers. These people, for much of the pandemic, were far more likely than others to get COVID. They were at a much higher risk of catching it. So I absolutely do agree with the premise of this question, which is that we have to work toward a green and just recovery plan. It has to put those voices who were least likely to be heard during the pandemic at the forefront of our plan. And I would commit to working toward a plan, working with those communities to create a plan that addresses their needs.
Great. Thanks so much, Mr. Osborne. Okay, just a quick check-in for everyone. Just some housekeeping. If you're in the audience and have a chance to turn your mic on, we ask that you don't and you keep it muted so just we can hear everything really clearly from all of our candidates who've given their time to be with us tonight. The next thing is for people who are speaking, just be mindful that sometimes your mic can bang against things and that can affect the auditory quality. So just be mindful of where your mic is is hanging if you're using a mic. Without any further ado, oh, one more thing that I wrote down, and that is that Yvonne, our timekeeper who is ringing the bell, if you could just ring that a little bit louder just to make sure that the candidates can hear it, that would be good, or try a different sound just to make sure that we all know that we're within the time limits and we can keep things according to plan. So I'm going to move on to the third question. And the third question is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act is our overarching law to protect the health and environment of Canadians. The Act has not been significantly amended since 1999, despite major changes in our understanding of toxic substances in our environment. A recent bill introduced in the last Parliament did not make it past first reading. Will you support getting this bill reintroduced, strengthened, and made a top legislative priority? Each of you will have 1.5 minutes to respond to this question, and we're going to start this time with Dr. Foster.
Okay, remember to unmute. On page 14 of the just released Be Daring Green Party of Canada platform for 2021, we read as a goal that the Green government will modernize the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. They'd prioritize legislation to modernize the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, ensure the right to a healthy environment enforceable in law, prevent exposure to toxins and pollution by requiring labeling of chemicals and GMOs in consumer products, including cosmetics, cleaning, and furniture. I'd also like to bring attention to the reference to a bill that was on the floor and did not go past first reading. I believe that's referring to Bill 230, which was introduced by our past MP. And what I'd like to say on that is that in itself speaks to the commitment of the Liberal government to the environment. It didn't get passed. If it was really that important, they would have done. It also speaks to how they treat MPs from this riding. They're backbenchers. If it wasn't a backbencher bill, it probably would have been up front. I'd also like to say that, no, I would not support that bill as it is written. And pardon the pun, it has no meat. It basically says that the government will study and then not actually implement.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. Next, we're going to have Mr. Archer.
Thank you. Since you haven't cited specifically what bill you're talking about, I'm unable to give you a definitive answer. However, what residents are telling me at the door is that trying to recycle old solutions to current problems is a constant fault of Liberal and Conservative governments. Our elected representatives give virtue signaling lip service rather than addressing the needs that are affecting us all. A great example is our former MP, Miss Ann. She brought in failed legislation when she was an NDP and an MLA on environmental racism and failed again in Ottawa. In both instances, she was acting as an activist rather than an advocate for her constituents. Rather than focusing on our coastal erosion, the isthmus, securing our rail lines, food security, or any other number of environmental issues that needs to be addressed, they are focusing on wasteful spending and recycled studies rather than action. As one of your earlier questions alluded to, our country has a growing population without the infrastructure to support it. Without a plan to address the growing population, we are going to be in a more dire situation with our environment and more people falling between the cracks, not just the marginalized. As an elected official, I would be focused on short and long-term solutions to our environmental concerns while being wary of unintended consequences, unlike the lip service and incoherent messaging of the other parties. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Archer. Next, we have Ms. Sand, same question.
Thank you so much. And actually, it was Bill C-28, which our government introduced, which, if enacted, would amend the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and other federal legislation. And it would have been an extremely good step forward for Canada. But however, the Conservatives held it up over and over and over again. And I was pretty disgusted by their behavior actually in preventing this important act from being passed. This government is definitely committed to improving SEPA, which governs most toxic chemicals. And it would enshrine the right to a healthy environment in federal law, which also was part of my bill, which is Bill C-230, which actually made it to third reading and passed the Environment Committee, which I was very, very pleased to see. And if we are reelected, that bill will be reintroduced, and I'm really looking forward to that. We are committed to doing a full review of the legislation governing the use of pesticides. And we're also introducing legislation to phase out toxicity testing on animals. And we have an action plan to protect firefighters from exposure to burning flame retardants and fund, which is found in modern household products. All of these things are covered by SEPA. And we are very, very committed to making sure that this bill gets passed again and that we make it law. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Sand. We're going to move on then now to Mr. Osborne for the same question.
Thank you, Paul. Look, the government amendments to SEPA are a good step in the right direction. It has been almost 22 years since that legislation was originally passed. Our understanding of the environment in Canada, on how toxins interact with our environment, that's changed a lot in the last 22 years. I think personally, I believe that the Liberal Party was in the right to introduce these amendments. An NDP government would not stop there, though. As member of Parliament, I would work towards an environmental Bill of Rights. I think that just like Canada has a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, there are certain rights that every Canadian is entitled to. We also need to be working to protect the rights of our environment. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Osborne. And lastly, we're going to have Dr. Ellis on this question. Same question.
Thanks, Paul. It's certainly unfortunate that significant updates to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act have not been a priority of the current Liberal government. In fact, a Conservative MP, Scott Davidson, introduced an update to the EPA Bill C-204, which prohibits the export of certain types of plastic waste to foreign countries for disposal. The good news is the bill passed a few months ago, despite every single Liberal sitting in the House of Commons for that vote, voted against it. This type of partisanship does not benefit Canada or the environment. We will continue to strengthen Canada's position on plastic waste, conservation of habitats, and ending raw sewage dumping into waterways, such as the Minas Basin.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. And we're going to move on to the next question. And one thing I just like to change is I think that at least I'm having a bit of trouble hearing the noise. So what I'm going to do is I'll just turn on my mic and wave at you folks. That will be your 30-second timer, and then I'll come on again and do the same. So if you see me waving once, that means you have 30 seconds left. If you see me waving twice, that means you should wrap it up as soon as possible. Is that okay? A little bit of change with the format. Okay, so we're on to our question 4. And question 4, Indigenous people play a critical role in environmental solutions. Will you implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Will you invest in Indigenous-led land use planning and the establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas? And again, after this question, each candidate will have 1.5 minutes, so 1 minute and 30 seconds to give their answer. And this time we're going to begin with Mr. Archer. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Archer.
This is an important question that is difficult because it has consequences for non-government owned land. As a matter of fact, we here in Cumberland-Colchester are on unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Our First Nations play an important role and we have lots to learn from them. With that said, it would not be up to the Canadian government to designate First Nations territorial land or dictate their land use planning. The War of 1812 was won, and Canada became what it is in large part due to the help of the First Nations. What would those elders think today about the Liberals, Conservatives, NDP, and Greens allowing Quebec to dump raw sewage into the St. Lawrence River? The St. Lawrence drains more than 25% of the Earth's freshwater reserves and influences the environmental processes of the entire North American continent. And that's taken from Canada.ca. A simple answer: developing a credible plan includes addressing raw sewage being dumped into our waterways. This alone is a big step in achieving our goal. It's a simple solution. Why hasn't this been done? The people of Spring Hill and Parsboro are spending more for upgraded water and sewer, in part to prevent raw sewage from going into the Bay of Fundy. Where was Lenore helping to get additional funding to help with the cost rather than placing the burden on struggling residents?
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Next up, we're going to have Ms. Sand with the same question.
Thanks very much, and I really appreciate this question. I am actually a member of the Standing Committee for Northern and Indigenous Affairs, and I worked on this bill, UNDRIP Bill C-15, and was very pleased to be able to pass it, in spite of, again, Conservative members voting against it, holding it up, coming up with all kinds of ridiculous reasons not to address it, and really disrespectful of our Indigenous peoples across Canada. The Liberal government supports UNDRIP, and we also will be implementing the act that is part of renewing the relationship between the government of Canada and Indigenous peoples, and a re-elected government will make a whole of government approach to UNDRIP very, very crucial by including it in every cabinet minister's mandate letter. The Liberal government has already committed $340 million in new funding to specify these kinds of. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sand. Next, we're going to have Mr. Osborne with the same question.
Look, Paul, I agree. We have to implement all of the recommendations of UNDRIP. Not implementing them is not an option any longer. We need to remember whose land we're on. We may exist in Canada. Canada may be what is governing this land, but this is unceded land that belongs to the Mi'kmaq people. I believe that if we're going to use this land, we have to do it in a way that is respectful to the communities that were here before us.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Osborne. Next up on this question, we have Dr. Ellis.
Thanks, Paul. Our Secure the Environment platform states that our government will be working with Indigenous communities, including by expanding the creation of Indigenous protected and conserved areas managed and stewarded by Indigenous guardians. This will allow us to continue the work with Indigenous communities that a Conservative government began with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as part of the 2007 Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement. We support treaty rights and the process of reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous peoples. To me, it appears that Liberals are cherry-picking recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission instead of doing the hard work of tackling issues that will improve the lives of Indigenous peoples across Canada, including providing First Nations people with clean drinking water on reserves, providing more economic opportunities or support for education, providing Indigenous businesses better access to government procurement opportunities, and helping end human trafficking rings that have abused Indigenous women and girls for decades. We will continue to call for a swift timeline and funding to deliver on the Truth and Reconciliation Calls for Action 71 to 76 involving missing children and providing healing for families. Our government will be a reliable partner in addressing the housing needs of Indigenous communities by implementing a for Indigenous, by Indigenous housing strategy in the spirit of reconciliation. And a Conservative government will provide $1 billion over 5 years to boost funding for Indigenous mental health and drug treatment programs. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Ellis. Right on time. Okay. And last on this question, we have Dr. Foster.
The simple answer is yes. Those are all goals and ideals of the Green Party platform. The other answer is not not will we invest in Indigenous land use planning and establishment of Indigenous protected lands and conservation areas. The question is, will we use the expertise and the hidden knowledge of the Indigenous community in the stewardship of all land in the country? The fires out west are a case in point. 4 years ago, I had opportunity to talk to the people who were the fire marshals type of the Fort Mac fires and in charge of evacuating people. And they told me that over 100 years ago, there were Indigenous fire starters, and they were the people who were responsible for making firewalls and making sure that forest fires didn't run rampant. And what happened? The white man came along, and punishment of death, the fire starters who were serving a great service were put to death. So we need to use the knowledge of the Indigenous people, not just on Indigenous land.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. We're going to move on now to our fifth question. And just as a reminder, candidates, I'm going to raise my hand once when you're 30 seconds left. And then if I'm waving it a little more vigorously, maybe that'll make the distinction a little clearer. So sorry, just trying to roll with the change of plan. So this next question, at question 5, this is the final question that is standard across across all of the debates before we move on to the questions from our community. And the question is, will you join the all-party Climate Caucus to work collaboratively with MPs from across the aisle on policy solutions? And we're hoping for a quick yes or no answer, 30 seconds max. And we're going to start with Ms. Sam.
Thanks very much. And actually, I already am a member of the All-Party Environment Committee. And we've had a number of meetings already in the last couple of years. Member of Parliament Elizabeth May and I worked very closely on a number of things, including my bill C-230, an act to redress environmental racism. And it was very exciting to work with people from across the aisles. But I'll tell you, in the end, of course, the Conservatives disappointed once they were on the floor of the House and voted again and again and again against changes and to environmental protection in Canada. And that was a very sad thing to see. But yes, I am definitely planning on being a member if I am reelected. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenore. Next up, we have Mr. Osborne with the same question.
Yes, I would, Paul, with hesitancy. I am absolutely committed to working collaboratively with other members of Parliament on all issues, especially climate action, because it is one of the most important issues of our time. However, do I see myself making a lot of good results working with members of Parliament who aren't sure whether or not climate change is real or whether or not it's man-made? I can't say, but I would join it, yes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Osborne. Next up, we have Dr. Ellis. Same question, 30 seconds.
Thanks, Paul. You know, certainly the real issue of climate change, as we all know, is a real issue. And I guess I find it unusual that someone would bring that up. That being said, I would be honored to ask to be joining this group. Absolutely.
Great, thank you so much. Next, the same question we have for Dr. Foster.
I would hope that Elizabeth May would be reelected and that she would sit on that committee. However, if I was the most qualified person to do that job, then I would certainly stand. I would also bring to the table a different light, sometimes looking at things from a different lens, looking at the lens from healthcare, looking at the lens from agriculture might make a difference.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Foster. Okay, thank you so
How
much.
about, how about me?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Apologies.
No worries.
That would be Mr. Archer. Apologies there.
No worries. Who would say no to this question? We need to work together to find solutions to our problems rather than focusing on one small part. We also have to take into consideration that a solution for one part of the country may not work in another. An example is coastal erosion here is different than Northwest Territories. We do, however, have common goals such as emission and greenhouse gas reductions. A great start would be a sector by sector review to check off the easy targets. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much. And my apologies for missing you there. I'm going to move on now to the section of the debate that's questions from our local community. So there's going to be 3 questions. And as a reminder, after that, then we're going to finish up with some closing remarks. So the next question is, how would you rank protecting the environment and mitigating climate change as a personal political priority? Can you tell us more about your dedication to these issues and how you inform yourself? For example, have you read the most recent IPCC report? And we're going to start with Mr. Osborne for this response.
I think that it should be a top priority of every member of parliament and every elected politician across this country. Every other issue that I'm campaigning on, that everybody in this debate is campaigning on, they don't matter unless we address the climate crisis. My party has put forward a very comprehensive platform that tackles issues like wealth inequality, issues like racism, and issues like access to prescription medications. However, unless we first address the very real scenario that we may in 20 or 30 years time not have a habitable planet, none of those issues matter. And so that is why it is a top priority to me. I haven't read the IPCC report in its entirety. It's around 1,300 pages, but I have read the IPCC summary for policymakers. And I think that it's something that every policymaker in this country should be reading.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Osborne. Next up, we have Dr. Ellis. Same question, and you have a minute and a half to respond.
Thanks, Paul. You know, as I door knock around Cumberland-Colchester, and personally I've gotten to about 2,000 doors, the main priority for voters is healthcare. So healthcare will be my top priority. In so many ways that we've already discussed, healthcare and the environment are closely linked. And having a healthy climate is an essential basis to healthcare. So the two, as I said, are inextricably linked. I have indeed read the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, and I'm indeed familiar with many of the other climate reports dating back, as all of you know, hopefully back to 1972, and including the Montreal Protocol of 1987. I like to live my life to be climate aware, and I often take my bicycle out when I'm knocking on doors, and you can see that on my Facebook page. And hopefully all of you are tired of politicians making promises that aren't realistic or sustainable. And maybe the only way that things are actually going to change for you is to change your vote. I'm going to tell you that we have a plan, and it's a realistic plan. You can find it at our website at conservative.ca. Click on the plan and then on the environment and read it. And then before you cast your ballot, think about whether or not you want actual change. And if you do, that change needs to start here with you and your vote. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Ellis. Next up, we have Dr. Foster. Same question.
Hello, the IPCC report just came out less than a month ago. And it over about 3,500 pages. It's a little bit of a daunting task, especially when other things are happening. The question is a personal political priority. The protecting the environment and mitigating climate change is a personal priority of mine in everything we do. And that comes down to food waste reduction, into carbon sinking on our home farm in pastoral agriculture, in reducing trips in all sorts of ways. It's always key to my being. What I would like to say is that I, as a veterinarian, am also a One Health practitioner, and that is the intersection of human health, animal health, and environmental health. And yes, I would, in that light, make protecting the environment and mitigating climate change a priority.
Great, thank you, Dr. Foster. Next, we have Mr. Archer, same question.
Anybody who wants to represent you in this riding who doesn't have the environment on the top of their list for important issues does not have this riding or the constituents as their top priority. We have a lack of leadership when we have an MP who is wasting time, resources, and money recycling studies such as environmental racism and putting a gender lens to it. An additional challenge comes from a party like the Conservatives who can't agree that climate change is real. The other part is the governing Liberals, NDP, and Greens who give a lot of lip service. It is imperative that people not only read the current IPCC report, but also communicate with those professional groups and organizations who have ideas on how to manage and mitigate our local environmental risks. It behooves me that we have not seen any of our past Liberal or Conservative MPs create a local stakeholder group to address these solutions. This is one of the first things I would implement along with financial resources for environmental purposes. If elected, not only is the environment one of my top priorities, as it should be, I would ensure that my staff is well-versed and involved with stakeholders in the community to ensure that communication is always flowing. And unlike the Liberals and Conservatives, I will not offer lip service. It's time for action.
Thanks, Mr. Archer. And last on this question, we're going to have Ms. Sand.
Thank you so much. And I have to say that as a former MLA for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, and Salmon River, for 10 years, I introduced bills that were to protect the environment, including an Environmental Bill of Rights, the Environment Act amended, Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, the Plastic Bag Reduction Act, Redressing Environmental Racism, the Truth and Reconciliation and Commitment Act, the Agriculture Marshland Conservation Act, which was directly about preserving and protecting the Chignecto Isthmus. If you just look up my record, you will see many different things that I've done as an MLA to help the environment. And as a member of parliament, I've been proud to vote and to support anything and everything that will help to protect our environment and halt climate change and global warming, which is at a very, very dangerous level for the future of our children, our grandchildren, and the generations to come. So I would think that the Conservative members should consider this and also make this a very important part of his work going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sand. The next question here is a short question, but a very important question. And that is, again, we'll have 1.5 minutes to respond. And the question is, how much of a role do you think that nature should have in Canada's climate policy? And we're going to start there with Dr. Ellis.
Sorry, I had to get off mute. As I stated earlier, a Conservative government is going to invest an additional $3 billion between now and 2030 in natural climate solutions focused on management of forest, crop, and grazing lands, and restoration of grasslands, wetlands, and forests. We will also recognize and build on the world-leading sustainable practices of Canada's agricultural and forestry sectors, by recognizing and encouraging emissions reducing practices like low or no-till and 4R nutrient stewardship. We'll establish transparent, reliable standards for carbon credits associated with land management practices, with the eventual goal of establishing a national carbon offset market. This market would link together existing compliance programs associated with federal and provincial regulations. We'll also explore the use of incentives to preserve and enhance natural infrastructure on private lands that contribute to climate mitigation and adaptation, with a particular focus on working landscapes with downstream impacts on populated areas. Working with provinces, territories, and the agriculture and forestry sectors to identify and support ways in which the sectors can contribute to enhancing carbon sequestration, invest in forest health and wildfire prevention and early detection, and work with Indigenous communities, including by expanding the creation of Indigenous protected and conserved areas managed and stewarded by Indigenous guardians.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Ellis. Next up, we have same question for Dr. Foster.
Hi, there are two parts to that question in my mind. One is the noun nature, and the other is using natural systems and natural methods for mitigating damage that humans do on this earth, both at home and away. Of course, nature, what is there should be preserved. It shouldn't be made obsolete. There shouldn't be the ability to sell our natural resources to foreign interests. All those things need to be kept in mind, and that has not been a priority of any of the past governments. As far as natural systems, it's very simple. The sun shines, the rain falls, the soil is there, and vegetation grows if we look after it. And the Green Party is the only party that is not wanting to embrace agriculture or other methods or forestry where that soil and that biome and that doing things for the climate is destroyed. So yeah, I'd like to see a priority put on using natural methods of mitigating climate change, including waste reduction.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Foster. Next up, we have Mr. Archer.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm not sure what you're trying to ask there, but yes, the environment is important to protect and part of our current and should most definitely be a part of any long-term environmental plans. 90% of Canada's population is centralized along the US-Canada border, and over 80% is uninhabited. Canada is the world's second largest landmass. We rank 39th in population with less than 0.5% of the world's total population. Canada is responsible for 1.6% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Although on the global scale, that's not a lot. However, we don't want to turn into the next China or India and not have proper land use and protection plans. There's a lot that we can do, which would not take much effort, but takes political will. And stop pandering to special interest groups and focus on core issues. Here in Cumberland County, we are in lowlands along the Bay of Fundy, Minas Basin, and Northumberland Strait. Salmon and North Rivers are experiencing yearly reoccurring floods. We have the isthmus and the connection to the rest of Canada at threat every day because successive Liberal and Conservative governments have failed to address coastal erosion and rising sea levels. It is my belief that every dollar in parliamentary sessions spent on recycling special interest studies is $1 less in time wasted from addressing real issues that have been around for generations. We can't continue to kick the can down the road. Neither the Liberals nor the Conservatives can claim any credit for addressing environmental issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Next up on the same question, we have Ms. Sand.
Thank you very much. I believe that the key to this problem is cutting pollution. We've destroyed enough of our forests. We've hurt wildlife from one end of Canada to the next, and including in our oceans. we need to take this seriously. And that's why the Liberal government put a price on pollution. And we will stick with that. We've taken very strong action, and we plan to do more. We want to reduce pollution in every single sector, in transportation, in housing, electricity generation, and industry. And we have started to do that. Also, I would say that Aaron O'Toole has said that he would kill our tanker ban and revive new pipeline projects such as the Northern Gateway, which would destroy BC's Great Bear Rainforest. So as far as I'm concerned, the choice is clear. It's either more pipelines, more pollution, and less climate action under Aaron O'Toole, but under the Liberals, less pollution, more climate action, and more jobs to keep Canada moving forward together. And let's protect our environment and the beautiful wildlife that we love so much here in Canada. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Ann. And it looks like we have a response from Ms. Foster. So I think, let me just check the time for that. It's either 30 seconds or 1 minute. And I just want to confirm before I give the floor to you. Yes. Oh, goodness. Just one moment, please. I'm sorry, I just lost my note there with the timing for the rebuttal.
Why don't I just try and make it 30 seconds?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'd like to bring attention to the $3 billion conservative commitment. That was the dip that the Canadian economy had post the BSE crisis in 2003 for a few years. It is pittance in comparison to what change and what difference using natural systems, regenerative systems, permaculture can make to the Canadian and Acadian economy. This riding is a riding that was founded on regenerative agricultural principles going back over, almost 300 years, 400 years if you count with when the Acadians first came. And that is what was the lifeblood of this community. It is what can be the lifeblood of this community again, and it is what is needed. So I would like to see a program where farmers and landowners are supported who are taking the risk to go regeneratively. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dr. Foster, for that response. And seeing no other responses in line, we're going to move on to our next candidate to respond to the question 7, and that's Mr. Osborne. I'll give you the floor.
We absolutely need to be focused on protecting our nature and our lovely natural landscapes in Canada. Look, for a long time, it's really felt like the Canadian government has prioritized profits over Canada's nature, leaving less and less for each consecutive generation. I'm in favor of forestry, but we need to do it in a way that protects our forests. I'm in favor of aquaculture, but we need to do it in a way that protects our oceans. We need to do climate action in a way that is going to leave a good natural landscape and a good environment, a good climate for future generations, pardon me. I think that's what this all has to be about.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Osborne. This leads us to our last question before the final remarks. And this is about something that we've talked a lot on today. Lots of candidates have touched on this. So, and it's a very local problem for our riding. So the Isthmus of Chignecto is vulnerable to rising sea levels and storm surges. With more frequent storms due to climate change, the risk of the low-lying land being flooded is increasing. At some point, neither the dikes that were built to protect agricultural land nor the railway will be able to hold back the waters and prevent the Trans-Canada Highway from being washed away or prevent flooding in Amherst and in Sackville. All shipments between the Port of Halifax and the rest of Canada would stop. Do you have an opinion about what should happen with the Isthmus of Chignecto? And each of you will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to respond to this question, starting with Dr. Foster.
I completely agree that the Isthmus of Chignecto is a narrow piece of land, that erosion and rising sea levels are a very, very imminent or potential risk. My son is, well, earlier today was out actually doing maintenance on the dike systems. The railroad and the highway that go through our riding, I'd like to tell just a little bit of a story from going back to the year 2000, when the Liberal Minister of Agriculture was in conversation with me at a rural conference, talking about things that are needed for rural Canada, and in a think tank. And it basically came to light that the rest of Canada, as far as government, thinks of our riding as a path through a swamp to this port of Halifax. There is a solution if we can, and it doesn't necessarily mean prohibiting all the erosion. It's going to happen, but there is a bridge to Prince Edward Island that I look at out my window. That is possible. There are possibilities, and there are things that we can do and can do in conjunction with nature without necessarily saying that we're going to be completely shut off. Otherwise, we need to be self-sufficient as an island.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foster. Same question, 1.5 minutes. We have Mr. Archer up next.
I'm so glad that this question was asked, as it has come up at almost every single door, and it is an amazingly important issue that has been facing us for generations that needs to be addressed once and for all. The French Acadian designed and built this system 400 years ago. Like I said, we can't continue to kick the can down the road. Although we call the environmental catastrophe Mother Nature, environmental issues don't care about your gender, race, or religion. It is a leadership failure by successive Liberal and Conservative governments, including our current MPs, for continuing to ask for a gender lens when we need shovels in the ground. The sad part is that we have Lenore asking for a gender lens rather than spending money on solutions that have been identified from numerous previous studies. It's sad that successive Conservative and Liberal governments have done nothing. As mentioned, there are numerous shovel-ready projects that have been identified within previous studies. Despite the massive debt by Lenore Zann and the Liberals and the doubling of the country's national debt in the last 18 months, she has failed to secure $1 in funding to protect this land and the environment. We need an advocate, not an activist. And if the environment is your deciding election issue, then your vote would go a long way with myself as your MP, as I would fight for the solutions that we need. How can we trust a Conservative leader that has changed his messaging on the environment and a candidate who has not called out their leader on what matters most? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Next up with the same question, we have Ms. Zann.
Thank you very much. And actually, I would like to draw everybody's attention to the fact that I did introduce a bill, Bill 111, on April the 4th of 2018 in the Nova Scotia legislature, which would address this issue of the Chignecto Isthmus. I was asking that the Agricultural Marshland Conservation Act be amended and that the minister would take such measures as the necessary or advisable maintenance of the land link between the provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And in fact, after I introduced this bill, which was not passed, both the province of Nova Scotia and the province of New Brunswick and the Canadian government all went in on an engineering study, which will be coming out very shortly to advise both provinces and the federal government what is the best solution to protect Nova Scotia and prevent it from becoming an island. And I look very much forward to that study coming out. And as the Member of Parliament for Cumberland-Colchester, I would be working very hard to make sure that it gets done and that all of our people and our lands are protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Zann. And that looks like we have Mr. Archer with his hand raised for a response. So the floor is yours, Mr. Archer.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to remind Ms. Than that this debate is about her past 2 years as MP in Ottawa and not about what she did as an NDP MLA. I can understand that all these other parties are very similar and it's hard to tell one from the other, but this debate is actually about her past 2 years as member of parliament and not member of the legislative assembly for Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. We are now going to move along in the order of answering questions. And next up is Mr. Osborne for the final question about the isthmus. So, floor is yours.
Look, just like all of the major climate issues that we're dealing with today, we need to look at the Chignecto Isthmus through two lenses. We need to look at how we can mitigate a crisis and how we can adapt to a crisis. We can mitigate or prevent a crisis at the Chignecto Isthmus by creating strong carbon reduction goals, which will prevent the sea level from rising any further. And I believe that that's where our major focus right now has to be. However, after years of liberals and conservatives and foreign governments as well doing little to prevent this sea level rise from going any further, we're also going to have to look at creating some adaptive solutions on the Chignecto Isthmus. It sucks, but unfortunately, within my lifetime, we're probably going to see the sea level rise above the Chignecto Isthmus, above the CN Railroad and above the Trans-Canada Highway. And before that point comes, we are going to have to look at raising our critical infrastructure on the isthmus to prevent Nova Scotia from becoming disconnected with the rest of the continent.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. And last on this question, we have Dr. Ellis, a minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you. As we've all mentioned, there's critical infrastructure within the isthmus, including the Trans-Canada Highway, the Canadian National Rail Line, electricity transmission lines, and agricultural dikes. The isthmus itself was divested to the provinces in the 1970s, so the dikes are actually under the jurisdiction of the provinces for their protection. Approximately $15 million a day in trade passes over the isthmus. Through the disaster relief budget, the previous Conservative government enabled the provinces to put in mitigation and environmental protections prior to any climate disasters occurring. I will work with the PC governments in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick to encourage disaster mitigation before it's too late. The Isthmus of Chignecto was originally designated a wilderness area by the Nova Scotia Progressive Conservative government in 2008. And in fact, Mark Parent, the Minister of Environment who designated it, and who also introduced the world-leading Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, EGSPA, is our Conservative candidate right next door in King's Hants. You're probably aware, as was mentioned, that in May 2018, $700,000 was allocated for a study on how to protect the Chignecto Isthmus from the effects of climate change. In June 2019, we were told the study would be concluded in February 2021. I can find this report nowhere. We need not to allow such efforts to be swept under the rug. Working to solve issues in Cumberland-Colchester will be a priority for me.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. So seeing no responses,
I think you just muted yourself.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I got so close, and then of course I had to do the classic mute. So that brings us to the end of our questions. And now we're going to end on the final part of the evening, which is our closing remarks. So each of you will have 1.5 minutes to make your case, and we'll go in reverse order to the opening statements. So that means we'll start with Ms. San.
Thank you so much. And this debate tonight is about the environment and climate change. That's what we're here to talk about. And as somebody who has 12 years of experience trying to work on these issues, both provincially and federally, I have to say, just look at my record if you have any doubts about where I stand on these issues. The biggest threat to the health and well-being of the people of Cumberland-Colchester is, I believe, climate change. And we need to address it as quickly as possible. I'd say that the people know the dangers. We know the dangers with regards to the Chignecto Isthmus. We know the dangers with regards to flooding, and I was very pleased to be able to help with that issue when we had a huge flood in 2010 and address it with about $9 million in 8 different areas that were hurt by the flooding in our area. We have had unprecedented heat this summer across Canada, with the wildfires out west affecting the air quality even here in Nova Scotia. So it's a complex issue about what we need to do, but I believe we need a government that is committed to addressing climate change and global warming. And the only choice, I believe, in this election in Cumberland-Colchester is to vote for Lenore Zann and the Liberals. And I promise you, I will do everything I can to mitigate climate change and help protect the people of Cumberland-Colchester. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Zann. Next up for closing remarks, we have Mr. Archer.
Thank you. I would like to thank everyone from the Living Earth Council and the other candidates for tonight. The environment is not just an emotional issue we want addressed. It is one of the most important issues in our riding and for our world that needs to be addressed. The other candidates and their parties will have you believe that their answers are the solutions. The Liberals and Conservatives have had their chances and blew it and don't deserve another chance. The last time that I checked, paying a carbon tax does not stop climate change, nor does it stop the destruction of our environment. Real solutions are not contrived lip service, but are found in tried and true shovels in the ground projects. This is a global issue that requires global partnerships. The other parties would have you believe that shutting down our economy will save the world. A 1.6% savings, which equals our entire economy, will have zero impact on the world that we live. We need to work with our industrial, educational, and research partners in Canada and internationally and find world-class options that we can implement globally. We need the world's largest emitters not to commit to more virtue signaling, but to actual reductions by using newer, better, cleaner technologies. I, as the PPC candidate, am the only one that is speaking for real action. The others are virtue signaling. What do you want, lip service or real action? I am the bill we can afford. I would love to earn your vote on or before September 20th. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Archer. Next up for the closing statements, we'll have Dr. Foster.
I don't know who said it. Maybe it was Einstein. But the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again with expecting a different result. I'm echoing Bill in that conservative or red and blue governments and the PPC, which is essentially an offshoot of a blue government, have always been doing the same thing and not paying attention to this riding and will not pay attention to this riding. We need to be able to support ourselves. We need food security. We can have food security. We can produce our own food and at the same time mitigate climate change through carbon sinks if we are recognized and we can do it. So what I'd like to say is that your vote is secret. Nobody needs to know how you voted, but please consider electing me to be not only your representative, but to stand for you and figure out what needs to be done with consultation with green values in Ottawa. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. Next up, we have Dr. Ellis with his closing remarks.
Well, thank all of you for spending this time listening to our views on the environment and climate change. And thank you to the organizers of the debate and to my fellow candidates for being here. This evening, we heard about my values and those of the Conservative Party. And please take time to read our environmental platform called Secure the Environment. It's realistic, and it's sustainable. And think about whether or not you want to mark your ballot the way you always have. What changes have occurred? According to the Government of Canada's own website, in 2015, under a Conservative government, the CO2 emissions in our country were at 723,000 megatons. And in 2019, which unfortunately is the most current data available under Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, it's 730,000 megatons. And that is up 7,000 megatons in just 4 years. And during the same time, the EU reduced its CO2 emissions by 3.7%. Sadly, it's not climate action. And is this how you're going to mark your ballot? Do you want real action? And if you want someone who'll be more action than words, lend me your vote for this election. The values that my wife Deborah and I use to raise our children will be the same values that I will continue to use if you elect me as your member of parliament. I humbly ask for your support, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. And last, with closing statements, we have Mr. Osborne.
Thank you, Paul. I think it's only appropriate to close by acknowledging one of the major criticisms that I've heard during this campaign, and that is the fact that I am young. It's true, I am only 18 years old, and all of the other candidates in this race are old enough to be my parents. In fact, Bill actually has children who are around my age. However, I don't think that's a reason to discredit me as a legitimate contender for this race, and so many voters who I've met so far on the doorsteps would agree with that. We need more young people in Ottawa, they tell me, and I agree. Look, I may not have the political experience of Lenore Zann or the environmental and agricultural experience of Dr. Jill Foster, but I do have another kind of experience. I have experience being a part of the generation that's going to be stuck with an environment that just isn't working. Part of the generation that knows what it feels like to be overlooked, that's going to be left with an insurmountable debt from this government and this generation's actions on climate change and environmental issues. I have experience with these very real things, these issues that folks all over Cumberland-Colchester are facing. That's why I can tell you with honesty and sincerity that I will work hard as your member of parliament, harder than anybody else running for this job. You have my word. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Osborne, for your final statement. And I just want to wrap things up by saying a big thank you to each of you. It's been a real pleasure to have you all here to participate in this and really bring your attention to the topic of the environment, which is important every election, but so extra important this time around. I've been watching the numbers. We've had about 50 people at the peak. We still have about 40, which is a fantastic turnout. And I know many others will be watching this broadcast later on after it's been posted. So if you could hear them, they're muted, they'd be clapping. We're all clapping. You folks did a great job. And it's really a real treat and a pleasure to see people willing to put themselves out for running for office and participating in the electoral process. It's a really hard thing to do, and kudos to all of you for being brave and for standing up for what you believe in. To the viewers who are here tonight, thank you for joining us. I hope what you've heard this evening has been informative, and just a reminder to please get out and vote on the 20th. So with that, we'll bring this webinar to a close, and thank you everyone for your time and for coming out to hear the candidates speak tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Night.